Why does a clear, objective truth often provoke a more violent reaction than a deliberate, malicious lie? It is a chilling paradox of human nature that the very light of clarity can trigger such deep shadows. When we strip away the illusions people live by, we rarely find gratitude. Instead, we often face intense hostility. We generally believe that humans are rational creatures who crave the truth as a means of improving their lives. However, a strange and confusing behavior emerges when someone is confronted with an undeniable fact that challenges their worldview. Instead of adjusting their perspective, they lash out, treating the messenger of truth as if they were a mortal enemy. There is a profound gap between our ideal of the truth seeker and the reality of the ego's defensive walls. This mystery deepens when we realize that the more accurate the truth is, the more aggressive the response becomes. It suggests that the mind is not looking for accuracy, but for something far more essential to its immediate survival. Why would a brain designed to perceive reality work so hard to reject it when it finally arrives clearly? Observers of human nature have long noticed that truth is frequently treated as a weapon rather than a gift. Arthur Schopenhauer famously noted that all truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. Only in the third stage is it accepted as being self-evident, but the second stage is where the damage occurs. This hidden psychological mechanism suggests that our sense of self is built upon a foundation of carefully curated personal myths. When you expose a truth that contradicts these myths, you aren't just sharing information, you are performing an act of demolition. Philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche observed that people sometimes do not want to hear the truth because they do not want illusions destroyed. This concept frames the ensuing anger as a form of grief for a lost reality that the person desperately needed. To understand this, we must look into the hidden machinery of the ego and the biological roots of our beliefs. The core psychological mechanism at work here is rooted in the preservation of what psychologists call the narrative self. Our brains are not just data processors, they are storytelling machines that create a coherent identity out of chaotic life events. When a truth threatens this identity, the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, is triggered as if by a physical predator. The mind does not distinguish between a threat to its body and a threat to its most deeply held convictions. This triggers a fight-or-flight response, and in social settings, the fight manifests as a sudden and inexplicable surge of anger. Daniel Kahneman explains that we rely on System 1 thinking, which is fast, emotional, and intensely protective of its existing patterns. If the truth requires System 2, the slow, logical part of the brain, it creates a state of painful cognitive dissonance. To resolve this pain, the mind finds it easier to discredit the source of the truth than to re-evaluate itself. Insecurity plays a massive role, acting as the mortar between the bricks of the individual's defensive and rigid psychological walls. Ego protection becomes the primary objective, leading the mind to utilize mental shortcuts that bypass logic entirely in favor of comfort. The mind naturally arrives at this pattern because it values psychological stability over the often volatile nature of objective and cold facts. Without conscious awareness, the individual perceives your honesty as a direct assault on their moral or intellectual standing in the world. The resulting anger is a smokescreen designed to obscure the truth and restore the ego's sense of unquestioned dominance. It is a sophisticated bypass of reality, allowing the person to remain in a state of comfortable, albeit dangerous, self-delusion. This behavior forms an impenetrable shell that prevents the light of outside perspective from reaching the vulnerable core of the person. The mind essentially chooses a state of high-functioning ignorance over the terrifying vulnerability that comes with admitting one has been wrong. In modern life, we see this play out in the workplace when a colleague is confronted with their own project failures. Instead of discussing the data, they focus on the tone of the critique or the perceived intent of the person speaking. They use anger to shift the focus away from the evidence and toward a social conflict where they can play victim. In romantic relationships, exposing a truth about a partner's behavior often leads to a cycle of gaslighting and defensive verbal outbursts. The partner isn't fighting the fact, they are fighting the feeling of being exposed as flawed, which feels like a death. Social media provides a limitless arena for this pattern, where groups bond over the shared rejection of uncomfortable and complex realities. When a truth is presented that challenges a group's tribal identity, the collective anger acts as a powerful psychological glue. We encounter this when a friend reacts with fury to a gentle suggestion that their current path might be self-destructive. The truth is so close to their own buried intuition that the resulting friction generates a heat they cannot contain quietly. In these moments, the anger is a diagnostic tool, revealing exactly where the person is most afraid of being seen. It is also prevalent in family dynamics, where keeping the peace is often code for never mentioning the obvious, painful truths. The person who finally speaks the truth is often cast out, labeled as the problem for disrupting the comfortable family lie. This modern landscape shows that while we have more information than ever, our emotional capacity for truth has not kept pace. We use our technological tools to build better fortresses for our biases, reacting with vitriol whenever those walls are finally breached. The anger is a signal that the truth has landed, but it has landed in a place that is not yet healed. Deeper behavioral patterns reveal that this anger is often a form of displaced shame that has nowhere else to go. Sigmund Freud suggested that we repress what we cannot handle, and truth acts as an unwanted key to that locked room. When the door is forced open, the repressed energy explodes outward as rage, targeting whoever held the key in their hand. Another layer is the misunderstanding of power. Many believe that being right is a permanent status rather than a constant pursuit. Robert Greene notes that the appearance of infallibility is often a shield for those who are most terrified of being judged. If they admit one truth, they fear the entire facade of their power will crumble like a house of cards. This leads to a pattern of emotional control through aggression, where the toxic person uses anger to silence any further inquiry. Over time, this behavior is reinforced because it works. People stop telling the truth to avoid the inevitable and exhausting explosion. The person becomes increasingly isolated in their own reality, surrounded only by those who are willing to facilitate their ongoing delusions. Knowledge is often treated as a static possession, and truth is seen as a thief trying to steal that sense of certainty. They fail to see that perception is a dynamic process, and that growth requires the constant shedding of old, incorrect beliefs. This psychological factor interacts with our biological desire for consistency, creating a mind that is functionally closed to any new data. The more significant the truth, the more it threatens the integrative complexity of their worldview, making the anger even more intense. Confidence is often used as a mask for this internal fragility, projecting a strength that cannot actually withstand any real scrutiny. When the mask is slipped, the person does not feel liberated, they feel naked and exposed to a cold and judgmental world. This leads to the backfire effect, where presenting facts actually strengthens the original incorrect belief in the person's mind through defense. They become more convinced of their lie simply because they had to work so hard to defend it against your truth. The interaction between ego and social status creates a situation where being wrong is seen as a total loss of face. In a culture that prizes being right over being wise, truth becomes a liability rather than an asset to be sought. The brutal realization is that most people are not intentionally trying to be deceptive or malicious in their defensive anger. Instead, they are limited by the boundaries of what their nervous system can emotionally process at that specific point in time. Carl Jung observed that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul and its shadows. The human mind is a master of protecting its identity, even if that identity is built on a foundation of falsehoods. The anger you face is not a reflection of your truth, but a reflection of their internal struggle to maintain balance. They are fighting for their psychological life, clinging to a version of reality that keeps them from falling into despair. We must realize that the capacity for truth is an emotional skill, not just an intellectual one, and many lack it. The mind protects its beliefs because they are the tools it uses to navigate a world it perceives as dangerous. When you challenge a belief, you are essentially trying to take away someone's compass while they are lost at sea. Their rage is the frantic reaction of a person who feels they are about to drown in a sea of uncertainty. It is a profound human limitation that we prioritize the feeling of safety over the actual facts of our existence. The truth is often too heavy for a mind that has been trained only to carry the weight of comfortable lies. This realization brings the focus back to ourselves, inviting us to examine our own reactions when we are the ones exposed. Every human mind is vulnerable to these patterns. None of us are naturally immune to the sting of a piercing truth. Think of the last time you felt a hot flash of annoyance when someone pointed out a flaw in your thinking. Was that anger a sign that they were wrong, or was it a sign that they were uncomfortably, precisely right? Marcus Aurelius advised that we should be grateful to those who correct us, for the truth never truly harmed anyone. However, the self that feels harmed is the one we have constructed to hide our vulnerabilities and our many daily mistakes. Ask yourself if you are more invested in being right or in actually being aware of the reality you live in. Introspection is the only path to breaking the cycle of defensive rage and opening the door to genuine personal growth. We must learn to sit with the discomfort of a shattered illusion, recognizing it as the birth pangs of a better perspective. The antidote to this psychological trap is the cultivation of a mindset rooted in radical curiosity and emotional resilience. This requires the humility to accept that our current understanding of the world is always a work in progress, never finished. When we value truth more than our ego, the anger begins to dissolve, replaced by a quiet and profound sense of relief. Intellectual honesty becomes a shield of a different kind, one that protects us not from the truth, but from our own self-deception. Recognizing our limitations allows us to build relationships based on reality, leading to deeper connections and a much healthier sense of self. In the end, the truth is not an enemy to be defeated, but a mirror that shows us where we need to grow. The people who can look into that mirror without flinching are the ones who ultimately find the most authentic and lasting peace. As we navigate a world of conflicting narratives, let us strive to be the ones who value the light, even when it stings. The final philosophical insight is that we are only as free as our willingness to be proven wrong by the actual world. Share your thoughts on how you've learned to handle the discomfort of the truth, and perhaps we can all grow a little more together.